Welcome to Conversations Live. For more than a decade, we've brought you the best in books, entertainment, celebrity interviews, and current events. When the movers and shakers of the world have something to say to you, they say it to us first. Here's your host, Cyrus Webb.
Welcome back, everyone, to Conversations Live. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb. Glad you all could join us once again. For a radio audience tuning in at WYAD 94.1 FM and WYADonline.com, we're glad that you all can join us. Also, tuning in through iHeartRadio and Amazon Music, we're glad you all could be with us as well. As we think about today's news, there's so much talk about things that have not only happened in the past, but also are impacting us today. Many of those things include things like racism and also mass incarceration. We're excited to welcome to our broadcast today Deborah G. She's written a book that is not only personal to her, but also talks about a topic that I think all of us can be able to relate to and be able to discuss. The book is called Of Greed and Glory, In Pursuit of Freedom for All. We'll talk to Deborah not only about the writing of the book, but also what it's like for her to be able to add her own personal journey in it with her family, but also something that is universal when it comes to having conversations about racism and mass incarceration and those impacted by it. If you all are just now finding out about the book, we'll let you know how to get your own copy of it. Deborah, thank you again for the time. Really do appreciate it.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Deborah, this book is something that is really powerfully written. When I was reading it myself, the thing I thought about was not only, of course, what you were able to give us when it comes to, your own family's journey and having to deal with this topic, personally, but also the larger impact and how this is something that this country, the United States, has dealt with and grappled with for quite some time. What has that conversation been like for you, Deborah, to show people, for one, this is not something new, but also the impact on incarceration and racism and the roles they play today?
Yeah, you're right. It's not new, and I think what we might have conversations about so that we can really get into the consequences, the collateral damage of locking people up and locking people up for life without the possibility of parole. So there is the consequences for the individual who's taken out of society. As my brother says, what am I doing here, and how can I possibly be helping other people? And then there is the consequences in his own family, with his own children and grandchildren, and then with his siblings. That's my brother, and so there is that. And then there is also the consequence that all of us, somehow, we're complicit in this, not only in terms of my brother in particular and the millions who are locked up along with him, but also in terms of how our willingness to allow this actually translate into forms of enslavement in our own everyday lives.
Yeah. And Deborah, I think that is the thing when I was reading the book, and I should let our audience know as a little bit of a backstory. One of the things that you do, of course, as I mentioned, you talk about is your brother, but also, of course, Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola. We've heard a lot about it. I myself have a friend of mine that is there as well. In Chapter 4 of the book, Ain't That Peculiar, you give us not only the history, but also I think the larger implications. I want to talk about that. When did you make the decision that you not only wanted to share your own story and have this conversation, Deborah, but also go back and show the history, how this was something that was really planned? We're not talking about something that happened by accident. This is something that was really put into the fabric of not only, of course, the state, but also this country.
That's right. Yes. When we look at mass incarceration, its roots are in enslavement, and it was planned. What we're experiencing today, and the whole idea of enslavement has to do with money and profit and greed, the willingness to treat other human beings as property and to make your wealth at their expense, to extract from them their energy, their skills, their life force, and then and so the body drops, and so you simply replace. So this is historical enslavement, and after emancipation, those who had dominated the economy, those who had dominated the production and what have you, it's like, well, that labor force, they wanted again to control that labor force. But when African Americans were emancipated and they had freedom of choice, they had freedom to work where they wanted to work or to work for themselves, this was not, tenable in the minds of those who had incarcerated us. And so the 13th Amendment allowed basically those who were these so-called slave masters to again assume that role, but now, they're not referred to necessarily as so-called slave masters, but they're the warden, they're the governor, they are, the business person of whatever enterprise is exploiting that labor. And, so we have these transformations, as Brian Stevenson said, the 13th Amendment didn't end slavery, slavery evolved. And so it looks like at that point in time in antebellum America, it looks like the convict leasing system. It looked like sharecropping and tenant farming and what have you. And so, and then with mass incarceration, it's just another formation of the same attitude and the same mentality that says it's okay to subjugate other human beings. It's okay to treat them as property. It's okay to exploit them. It's okay to get rich off of their labor. It's okay to do that. And this is where the title comes from, of greed and glory. At what expense? At what expense? And at the expense of humanity of so many people.
That's so true, Deborah. You write this, for those who have the hardcover of the book on page 101, under the subheading, Life is a Badge of Slavery. You wrote this, Deborah: from cotton to sugar, from corn to cowpeas, wheat and soybeans, the crops at Angola have rotated. But the hands that have planted and picked its fields from the antebellum era into the 21st century have consistently been black and bound. You go on to say this, and talking about in that same subheading, Deborah, about your brother's description. I want to read a bit of this, and I want to talk about what it was like for you to know what your brother was dealing with, but also why that became almost a catalyst for you for a project like this. You wrote this on page 102 of the hardcover: my brother's description of his first year in prison can be compared with what historians have described as the breaking in or seasoning period experienced by saltwater Africans, those who survived the Middle Passage to find that they would be forced to work cane fields in the Caribbean and South and Central America, or tobacco, cotton, or rice fields in the U.S. for the rest of their lives. My brother had survived 2 years at East Baton Rouge Parish Prison, his Middle Passage. Then in 2000, when he was sentenced to life at hard labor, he would be forced to work in the fields of Angola. Talk to us about that, because for a lot of people, this is something that is so sensitive that it would be difficult to share. But how did the personal experience, Deborah, help you in wanting to let people know that this could be their brother, this is someone else's brother, and this is something that has to be addressed?
Wow, that's I'll do my best with that. And thank you for reading that, because it captures so much of the impetus for me for writing this. And I tell you, when I got to a place in my life where I could actually consider looking for a lawyer for my brother, it just was very clear to me that what I was doing or trying to do or wanting to do was not different from those who were trying to buy, their loved ones out of slavery. It's not different. And when I look at what his conditions are, and I look at the conditions of those who were enslaved historically, we're talking about black people. Three of the main features of historical slavery was that, it targeted African people of African descent. It passed all kinds of laws from one colony to the next that Africans would be subject to enslavement for life, in perpetuity, or what they described as durante vita, right? And then also your children were subject to the same barbarism. And this parallels with my brother. Most of the people who are incarcerated are African American, or people of color, or people of low income. And most of those who are incarcerated for life, half of those who are incarcerated for life are African American, incarcerated with a sentence of life at hard labor without the possibility of parole. Life at hard labor without the possibility of parole. This is the description of enslavement. You can't get out. And even when we figured out ways to escape, enslavement, during the time of historical enslavement, they passed the fugitive slave law as though it's a crime to be free. And so that idea that it's okay to incarcerate black and brown and poor people, this is deep in the conscience of America, which is why it's been allowed. Like it's okay. It's an unconscious consensus, and we need to bring that up to the conscious level. And so, thinking about getting my brother back, and then looking at how and why he was taken. All of this has to do with, why I decided, I would talk about this, I would write about this, because this is not just my brother. This is everyone who is locked up, more than 2.5 million, and the thousands who are locked up every day. And beyond that, it's for all of us in this country who, in one way or another, experience being treated as property. The dehumanization is rampant and pervasive, and it permeates every sector of society.
To that point, Deborah, you said this in the final passage I want to share on page 172 of the hardcover. In freedom, we struggle to remain free. Or in the case of my jailed or imprisoned loved ones, like my brother Bobby, we struggle to regain freedom. So what are your final words for our audience here, Deborah? What do you hope them, when they read Of Greed and Glory, what do you want them to think about, not only about the system, but also about the role they play in it themselves?
And it is just that. It's how we are complicit in this barbaric institution, and how we also are sort of like not quite conscious of how that shows up in our own lives, And so I want us to become conscious of the fact that although we call ourselves the land of the free, there are millions who are not free, and then there are so many of us who are enthralled in various systems in, say, for instance, corporate America, where employees are treated as property, treated as just a means to more profit, treated as though they made no contribution and they don't matter and have no value beyond what can be extracted from them for the benefit of shareholders. It's the same thing, and I want us to begin to understand that, so we can really live with some kind of integrity when we say that America is about freedom and justice for all.
Yeah, such a great conversation. Again, everyone, Deborah G. Plant has been our guest. Her book is Of Greed and Glory, In Pursuit of Freedom for All. You can get it, of course, through our friends at Amazon.com or through your favorite local bookstore. If they don't have it, I know they'd be more than happy to order it for you. Deborah, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation and for stopping by the program today. How can our audience stay connected with you?
Well, they can connect with me through the HarperCollins Amistad website. Yes, and my agent will, contact me.
Okay. Well, Deborah, congratulations again, and looking forward to speaking with you on the next conversation together.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate the conversation, and thank you for having me here today.
Hey, glad to do it. And we thank your audience for tuning in to another great segment of Conversations Live.